Welcome. I think this is part 8 now. Is it part 8? Yeah, part 8 of our sequencer project. So we basically have it done. This is just a auxiliary one, addendum maybe, just to show you or point the direction to a few different things we can do with our project. I think it works pretty good. I mean, obviously, one would be to simply create more tracks. You can do that. So you can have, a bunch of different parallel tracks. You can have some adjustments to the speed of the cursor. So that's one thing you can do in processing. That could be something. You can maybe have the cursor go in reverse, or a couple cursors go at different speeds. So those are some possibilities. You can also have different samples played based on different things. And you can change the rate. There's another thing. You can have some things change the rate. All right. Well, let me just give you sort of an outline of how you might approach some of these things. And I'm not actually going to do all those because maybe it's time to move on to another project. But let me give you a basic outline. One approach would be to just give some arguments in here. All right. So you're sending this message, samp on, and it's triggering this here. It's receive sample on, and it is triggering that synth. Okay. But if I wanted to add an argument here, I can do a message.add. MSG, I'm going to add more information to your message. Okay, .add. And what am I going to add to it? Well, let's add a sample number. So maybe we can choose between, say, well, in my case, I only have 2 samples there. I mean, I can load some more, but I won't do that right now. So I'll just I'll add either the number 1 or the number 2. Or I can start from 0. We can say add the number 0 or the number 1. We can do that. And of course, you can do as many numbers as you have as samples. All right. So let's do that. Let's add, and I'm going to use the random, so it'll pick between 1 or 2. So I'm going to use random. Okay, and I'll say random 2. So it's going to pick a number between 0 and 2. Now, remember, random spits out a floating point number. So it's going to pick a floating point number somewhere between 0 and 2. So it could be 1.5. So that's no good because I just want either 1 or 2. So I'm going to use another function here called floor, which will basically round off the decimal point number to round down. It'll round everything down. So random is generating a floating point number between 0 and 2, but not including 2. So random does that. So it generates all the way up to like 1.99999, but it won't generate 2. And then floor will round down. So if it's 1.5, floor will be 1. If it's 0.7, floor will be 0. So it's going to always generate 0 or 1. Okay, that's great. So I have that. So and then I can choose between my samples. So that'll take a little bit of adjustment to my OSC def. So I'm going to open this up just so I can see what I'm doing and add some lines. So basically, I'm just going to have my 2 curly brackets on the bottom and top. And so it's going to first, and I'm going to create a variable here, just a local variable, var, and I call it samp number, something like that, or sample, but that's fine. Samp number will do, actually. And then I'm going to actually check what the message that comes in. Now, we do need an argument, MSG. Okay, so argument MSG is part of this sort of supercompiler uses these sort of preset arguments. All right, so I'm actually not. It's not just an open argument. What's coming in will always, in these OSC defs, MSG will always be the name first, samp on, and then all the data in an array. So let's just actually let's just post that, and you can see. Okay, so we'll go ahead and reevaluate this OSC def. Now I'm continuing on from the previous tutorial, so I've had everything evaluated. But if you wanted to, well, let's just do it. If you are starting from scratch, you need to do everything. You need to boot your server. You would need to load up your buffers and add your synth def to the server. And then you would have to evaluate your OSC def. Of course, you can do actually all these at the same time. Oops. What did I do? Oh, I didn't add a semicolon there, I think. So that's the problem. Oops, no. All right, you can't have anything between the arguments and the variables. I guess var has to precede or follow arg. Okay, there. See, that's there. So let's just run that real quick and see how it looks. So basically, you'll see that when it gets here, it prints this, and its array. The first 0 index is SAMP_ON, is the OSC tag, or OSC address, I guess you'd call it, and then the additional information. Now remember, we randomize it so it's 0 or 1. Okay, just so you see that's what's coming into the message. Okay, so we don't need that anymore. You've seen it. Now, basically, we want to choose a different buffer every time. Okay, so we're going to use an if statement, and the if statements in SuperCloud are look like this. We're going to say if MSG, and remember it's an array, so we have to index it, and it's not the first item of the array or the 0th, because that's the OSC address SAMP_ON. It's the first one, is the 1th, or the second one. So if message number 1, and then sometimes you have to do this little bit of massaging because sometimes the data, when it's being transmitted, isn't clear what kind of data type it is. So I like to just be extra careful and say .as integer. Just one little bit of code, a couple words, so that's okay. I don't mind doing that. If message 1 as integer, okay, and we'll say equals to 0, all right, and then so then the syntax now is comma and then 2 functions. This is if it's true, comma, and this function is if it's not true. Okay. All right. So if it is true, if it is 0, then we're going to use this variable here, samp num, and we're going to say that equals S1. Okay, and that's this buffer here. Else, if it's not equal to 0, since I only have 2s, but well, let me do it properly because you know, right. Anyways. If you can use a number of things, you can use switch if you want, but in this case, let me just keep it simple with ifs. You can just use a bunch of if statements if you want. In my case, if it's just binary, it's just 2 choices I can put in the else statement. So if it is 0, if it's anything but 0, then it'll just do number 2, right? But let's be more systematic because chances are you'll have more than one sample, so or more than 2, I should say. So if you say if equals 1, we'll do S2. And just to be extra careful, we'll just put a default in because chances are, I already know I'm not sending 0 or 1, but if something goes haywire, I'll just say samp number equals 0 for thing. Okay, and then the last thing we need to change is this bit so that it doesn't always play S1. We'll just say samp num. Okay, so if we evaluate that, now it's our new OSC def. If we play that, and then have a bunch of things there. Okay. Now you see already, you can tell that it's generating that new every time, right? Every time it hits, it's randomizing. Yeah. Every time it hits a dot. So the same dot might not be the same sample. All right. If you wanted to actually make them special samples, you're going to have to do something beforehand and then actually put that there. Okay. So for example, you can do it on your mouse press, and I'm just going to sort of guide you, and then you can do this on your own. This is more of a speculative sort of give you some ideas kind of tutorial. So you can do it mouse press. So when I press it, I can add into samps. You know, you can have, since it's an integer array, you can have it be 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of 1. Okay, and remember this just says if it's if samp is equal to 1, then it's going to trigger, right? Okay, you'll have to change that, right? So you can say if samps is greater than 0, for example, you can do that. And then here you can just, instead of message add random, you can say, you can use a switch or an if or something like that and say, you know, if samps I is equal to 2, then saying 2, or you can just say samps I, you know, you can say message add samps I here. Okay. And then you'll just change with the mouse pressed, you'll change what it equals to. Instead of 1, you can say, you know, equals to 2 or 3, and you'll have to have some sort of way of getting that in there. So you can have it random here, so that every time the dot will be the same. Or you can use, say, for keys, for example. So if I'm holding down the 2 key when I click, it'll do 2. If I'm holding down the 3 key when I click, you can do different things. Okay, and I'll leave it to you to look those things up. But basically, that's the idea. Is if you want to change anything. So the basic principle, the architecture here is that you can add messages here when you send, and you can add as many as you want. And these messages can be received and then evaluated or interpreted here in this OSC def. And for example, you can do rate. So that would be a good way to do rate, and various things. All right, so that's one approach there to that. I wanted to show you at least one more. Let's see, another possibility. And I'm just sort of making these things up as I go along. That's okay. It's sometimes nice. These prototyping type platforms like processing stuff really allow you to do that. Oh, right. If I wanted to sort of change the speed of the cursor, I could do that. So let's just use a key. So I'm going to use another function here called key pressed. Let's save this as sequencer 9 so we don't erase that. Save as sequencer 9. And we'll say further ideas. Okay. So if we use the function key pressed, okay, and we'll use another randomization. We'll say if key equals let's say S for speed, and we'll just say BPM. What do I call it? I think I just call it BPM. So we're just going to change our BPM. BPM equals, and we'll do random. Again, we'll have to floor it. Or is BPM a float? Oh, BPM is a float, so we don't even have to floor it. We'll do random, something like 20 BPM, between 20 and say 160, something like that. Okay, so every time I press the S key, it'll change the beats per minute to some random value between 20 and 160. Okay, let's save that. Okay, and if I press the S key here, okay. It's not working because I'm not evaluating BPM in draw. I'm actually evaluating it or preparing it here in setup. So that's the reason it's not working. So let's see what I do to prepare the BPM. I do a few things, I think. Right, I say sequence length equals 16 times BPM times 1,000. I do this little calculation, right? And then do I use sequence length? Let's just verify I use sequence length in draw. I do. So this gets updated every frame, sequence length, or it gets looked at every frame. So that's what I need. I need something that gets looked at every frame. So I'm going to need to drag this calculation down into here. Okay, so it does this calculation every time I press S, and then I verify that sequence length is actually being used in draw. Let's run that now. Okay, it does work. Okay. Now, you notice that it sort of skips around. That is not ideal, of course, but the solution is pretty. It's a little bit of work. So I'm not actually not going to do that right now. Maybe I'll show it to you in a future video. But basically, to give you the idea, if you want to pursue it on your own, you have to sort of create a phase. So basically, you have to. Well, there's probably a number of ways to skin that cat, but the way I've done it is I've created a phase. So basically, this being 0 and this being 1. So this is cursor's moving in a certain phase, and I've used a sort of phase adjustment. So I have a little phasing adjustment figure that will speed it up and then calculate what phase it would be at if it was going at that speed, and then pop it back so it doesn't jump. It doesn't actually jump when it changes speed. It just stays in the same place. And that actually was quite tricky to do. But in any case, you get the idea of the type of things you can do. So maybe speed wasn't the best example of the cursor, because you do have that jumpy around thing, but that's okay. Maybe another good thing, it shows you that you can use keys there. You can use, it's pretty simple there, keys to change various things, so you can do that. You can use keys maybe to change the rate, and then just send this rate, So in this message, you can add a rate thing, and you can have a global variable called rate, and then maybe have a key that randomizes or changes the rate of playback, and then it sends it here. And then you just have to evaluate message. So maybe the next thing would be message 2, and then that might change. And then you would say buff, and then you would say rate here. You change your argument rate as well. And then message 2 dot float, something like that. Okay? So a number of different things you can do. So those are basically 2 different models. I know I left it very speculative and open, but I think by this point, you should be able to understand this enough so that, the world is your oyster. You can create a bunch of different mods and different things. And like I said, maybe some future videos, I'll address some of these different things, because they are things I'm interested in, moving cursors at different speeds and reversing them and such like that. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. And that will wrap up this 9-part, is it 9-part? Well, this is maybe part 8 or 9-part series on a sequencer project from the start to the very finish.